All right, folks. Well, I got to give a shout out to Peter Trulin because he's the guy that gave us that fantastic intro and outro music. So thank you, Peter. And if you want to get in touch with Peter Trulin and commission some music of your own, his contact information is in the show notes. So go down and check that out. Because when you hear that tune, you know you're in for a treat. It's another week of the Rec Poker podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Blusterini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on the hellscape we call Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the free nightly home game. Now, I have to mention we're brought to you by Running Aces, the official sponsor of the Rec Poker podcast. They're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. You can find out more about them at runaces.com. And it's important to thank our sponsors because most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we depend on support from our sponsors and from our premium members who take part in our training material and study opportunities for only $22 a month. So you can always sign up for a free account at rec.poker. All it takes is an email address and a smile, but we do insist on both. But you can always get your free month of premium for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. And if $22 a month feels like a lot of money, and if $5 is too much for your first month, I just want to remind you that if you support your local food bank by making a donation of any amount, you just email us that proof of payment, and we'll give you a free month here at Rec Poker as a way to say thanks for supporting your local food bank. So lots of ways to get involved here, and it doesn't have to cost you more than $1. Now, they let me host the show on Mondays, but I'm only one man, and it takes a group, a gang, a crew to make all the magic happen around here at Rec Poker. We call this group of wizards the RECing Crew. Of course we do, because we're all huge dorks. And if you want to learn more about me or the rest of the RECing Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up. You're going to meet a few of them right here tonight on the show.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm Pat33 on the social platforms, Fergie56 in the home game. And I host a hand history review group once a month on the second Wednesday when I'm not traveling and playing poker.
Me, I'm Mark Zhang, and you can find me on the RECing page under Mr. Bullet. Once a month, the first Thursday, I'm hosting a office hours where we talk about hands about MTTs.
And I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, you can join me for the study group, and where we study all of the greatest books written by the greatest authors in poker.
There you go. So just a little taster's choice of all the fun stuff that we do over here. Every RECing Crew member has their own kind of area of strength or area of expertise, and they host these study groups all month long. And you can get involved with our premium membership here, and I encourage you to do so. One of the perks of being a premium member is that you get to come and hang out with the crew on the forums edition of the podcast. And maybe we'll even get a question from you to talk about with our panel here. This week, we're joined by Joe Millay, who's been a premium member for a few months now and just keeps getting better and better at poker. No coincidence, I don't think. Joe brought a question for us today, but first, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself to Rec Poker Nation?
Hi, my name is Joe Millay, and you can find me as jmetape on the home game. My question tonight is about sit and go tournaments, and are they? How do you adjust the strategy? I mean, like I enjoy playing them on Ignition. They have like three table tournaments, 27 players. And they also have like 6-handed tournaments, turbos, where the blinds go up every 5 minutes. And I was curious about, I don't see a whole lot of strategy out there, strategy websites or books, or even I find there's some content out there about them. I was just curious about your guys' thoughts on sit and go tournaments.
So we're going to talk a little bit about different kinds of sit and go tournaments, the adjustments that we might make in our tournament structure. I hear this it's not a complaint, but I hear this a lot from recreational players like, Jim, I don't have 8 hours to play large field MTTs. I don't have all Sunday to go line up a whole schedule of tournaments. So I need something shorter that as a recreational player, I can fit into my schedule. I've got a job, I've got a family, like I don't have this kind of time. And a lot of people choose single table tournaments, sit and goes, turbo events, flip and goes, these kind of things, spin and goes, these intentionally shorter, faster tournaments. And we're going to talk about those today. But before we do, I just want to I want to make a pitch. If you're listening and this sounds like you, consider playing cash. I know tournaments poker is so much fun. That's where all the excitement is. That's where the big multiplier of your buy-in is. But if you're looking for a way to kind of dip in and out in a small amount of time, you can't commit all day, you want to step up and leave anytime you want. Personally, I find cash to be a much better way of still being able to play the kind of poker that I'm used to playing without a turbo structure, without new ICM considerations from these smaller field tournaments or these differently structured tournaments. It's true that it's slightly different game, cash versus tournaments, but you're also already talking about how are you going to adjust to these different formats. So we're not going to talk about the differences between tournament and cash play in this episode, but if you're a recreational player and you're having a hard time committing to like a large field MTT tournament schedule, consider cash. There's a lot of upsides to diversifying the way that you play poker a little bit, and cash can be a really good complement to large field MTT play. Now, that being said, so Joe, you're talking about sit and goes or small field tournaments. Some of these are one table, some of them are two or even three tables. The idea is you have a fixed number of entrants. It means the tournament's over faster, so you're committing less time to it. The downside is there's less money in the prize pool, so first place isn't worth as much as it would be in a large field tournament, but there are a lot of advantages. The variance is less because you're in a smaller field, so you're gonna make more final tables, which is great. You're gonna get to play in that environment more often, which is good training for when you do go deep in an MTT. And as you say, the time commitment's a lot less. So I'm kind of curious, I'll open this up to the group. I know sit and go poker used to be kind of the bread and butter for a lot of pros coming up in the game. But it does feel like the industry has turned away from them a little bit recently. Rob, I think before we recorded, you said that you used to play a lot of sit and goes, and were they of a similar style to what you see today and what Joe's describing?
Yeah, it was, typically 9-handed. I'd play the single table sit and goes, and I think I was playing like $5 sit and goes on Party Poker. So that's a long time ago when Party Poker was actually in the United States. So it was a lot of fun. It was definitely a lot of fun. And again, it was, you get home from work, you can't sit up all night and play an 8-hour tournament because you still have to go to work the next day. So you could click on a couple of sit and goes, get your poker fix in and have a lot of fun. So that is, but then like you say, now when I look for those poker fixes where I don't have a huge amount of time, I end up playing cash rather than playing in a sit and go. I remember, I read a lot of books. I'm the book study guy, right? So I remember reading Darrow Carney was talking about in his book Endgame Poker Strategy that he developed a very good sense for ICM poker from playing sit and goes. Because when you play a sit and go, it's almost like being at a final table already. And so there is a lot more ICM considerations. I shouldn't say more, but more often you're involved in ICM situations in a sit and go just because of the size of the field. It's so small that you're getting into those ICM considerations more and more and more. So as you develop as a sit and go player, you are going to get involved in more of those ICM situations. So it should improve your overall ICM thinking when you get into a larger scale tournament and you get into those ICM situations. So that is one thing that I know that Daro Carney was very interested in because of the ICM considerations.
And so it's actually it's a situation where the more knowledgeable you are about ICM, the bigger edge you're going to have against the field in these tournaments in particular, because as Rob says, if in a 9-handed tournament, maybe the top 2 or the top 3 get paid. And so knowing, laddering up is only so important in certain spots, but not busting is also really important. So it's a good place to learn ICM, but it's also it's a place where if you aren't studied in ICM, you're kind of giving up a bit of a skill edge by playing in these tournaments at all, because the regulars and pros that play in them, that's their edge. So it is, you should consider that when you're thinking about tournament selection. Mark, you talked about sort of how we kind of approach different stages of this tournament. And it's a lot like a large field MTT. It's just all the stages are kind of condensed. Can you talk a little bit about how we might prioritize, doubling up in this part or preserving our stack in this part?
Yeah, so I think that like when Joe was talking about the 27 players, I believe 4 of top 5 get paid, and if you would play a single table tournament, it would be 9 players and 3 players get paid. So I think there's a bit of a difference in those two structures, because when 30% of it of the players get paid, you actually, it's more important to get 3rd place, because it's just less percentage of the field. It's more percentage of the field, but you have to cash it more often, just because it's 30%. You're supposed to cash it 1 in 3, right?
And there's less money at first place, right? That's part of it too, as opposed to in
I think that that depends on the actual payout. I wouldn't know,
point.
because I don't know how many people how many times first place gets when there are 27 people left. Let's say maybe he gets 5x or 10x. It depends on that. So I really can't make any judgment on that. I think what you said, when we are playing those 3 table tournaments, it's easier to get to the final table. So we actually get to practice final table more often. And I think that's a crucial skill, because when was the last time you actually made a final table in a big field tournament? It's so hard to make a final table. And just by playing sit and goes, you get to the final table way more often, and you just can repeatedly see what works, what doesn't work. How far can I go out of line to become chip leader, and how far can I push it as a chip leader? When if you are a chip leader in a 2,000 man field at the final table and you mess up, well, I don't know how long it takes for you to get to that spot, to that same exact spot again, right? So I think that's just playing a lot. Also, the difference also is you can just play so many, because if you bust out, you can re-enter it again.
Yeah, I like that. And also, oh, sorry, Mark, please continue.
Now, just a really tiny small thing is, I think the small blind is really important on how to play that, because it depends on if the first blind level structures have an ante or not, because some of them, they don't have an ante. And then you would have to play different ranges. You can't play as many hands, where if there is an ante, you try to actually win a percentage of that ante against the big blind as often as possible. So that changes up a bit of the strategy too.
I like that. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And when Mark talks about sort of getting more practiced at making final tables, there's this weird phase of all multi-table tournaments as you get down to the last two tables. You've got 18 players, you've got 9 on each table, then you're down to 16 players, you've got 8 on each table, now you're down to 14, you've got 7 on each table. And as you get down closer and closer to the final table, you actually end up playing quite shorthanded at these other two tables. And so it's a weird spot that this whole day in a tournament, you've been playing nine-handed. Now all of a sudden, on the cusp of making the final table, you're playing shorthanded. The blinds are coming by, 50% more frequently than they were before. And you have to play, you feel like you have to play more hands. You don't get to be as selective, and like there is no early position anymore. And then boom, you make the final table, and now you're back to 9-handed or even 10-handed, depending on how they do some of these final tables. So there is this weird dynamic as a player that can kind of mess with your flow a little bit. And being out, as Mark says, you don't know when you're going to next be in that position. And so the more times you can kind of put yourself through this simulation of this experience of this journey to the final table, the more comfortable, the more experienced you'll be when it happens, for real. Like, you know what I mean by that. But of course, these are for real too. But so that can be extremely valuable. Any other thoughts? We're going to talk about a few other things, but yeah, Mark, jump in.
Yeah, like what you said is, I think, really important for recreational players. I remember like 2 years ago, I was playing an 8-handed, like 600 or 800, I don't remember, and I busted. We were 7-handed, and I busted 2 people, so we were like 5 or 4-handed, and after 2 hands, like there was a woman at our table. She was like, "Whoa, we are short." You should know how to play short-handed. You should just not restrict yourself to playing like 10s plus, because when you get to final 2 tables, that's actually where you make the most money, because when you get to play more hands, you win more antes and more blinds. That gives you that position when you're at the final table to be one of the chip leaders. Because when you're actually going to 9-handed, there's not that much that you can do against early position, because it's a tight range, and they have 20 big blinds. You can't set mine, you can't like bluff. So just playing final 2 tables and getting that chip lead when you're short-handed is super important. Like it will define your tournament life.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we'll talk a little bit about other tournament variants and like turbo structures and that kind of stuff. But does anyone else want to weigh in anything specifically about how to approach these, 18 or 27 player tournaments? Okay.
One thing we want to remember, and this is something that a lot of recreational players don't consider, even in a large field tournament. You go to your local card room and play in a $100 or $200 tournament. At the beginning, you see a lot of people splashing a lot of chips around. And that is not necessarily the way to go in these types of tournaments, and especially in a sit and go. Tight is right at the beginning of a tournament. And it's amazing how fast your chip stack can dwindle if you're continually limping out of position just so you could see a flop and maybe make a hand. And that goes the same for a large tournament, a 100-player tournament, as it does for a 9-player tournament. At the beginning of the tournament, tight is right, because you're going to see a lot of people making mistakes, and you're going to be able to take advantage of it if you're always showing up with the top of a range over their wide range.
Yeah, I like that. So, so there's a lot of positive reasons to play in these tournaments, and specifically when it comes to sit and goes. I think if folks are looking for material online, like I say, this was kind of the bread and butter for pros. Like 20 years ago, like before we got really into the large field MTTs online, sit and goes were sort of where a lot of players cut their teeth and made their bankrolls. Because, like I say, it's not a huge payout to make first place, but the variance is lower, the time commitment is lower. People can multi-table them because they're all the same structure. So it was an easy way for players to get a lot of screens up and to lower their variance and still have a win rate. But again, like a lot of that stuff still applies to cash as well. So I'll just put one more shout out for cash there. So yes, you can probably find some information from sort of like in poker generations from like a generation ago, from when people were cutting their teeth on it. There was also, like, when I was building my bankroll, I played kind of a similar structure. I played a lot of one table tournaments that were called double or nothing tournaments. And they were set up in such a way where everyone bought in for $10 and it was 10-handed. And the 5 players that survived each got double their money and everyone else got nothing. So it was kind of a weird structure because, similar to a satellite, it doesn't benefit you to have all the chips in play. Everyone in the top 5 makes exactly the same amount of money. So if you can make 5th place, that's just as valuable for you as making first place. So that has its own kind of perverse incentives that are not typical for a standard MTT or a standard poker tournament. I know in that case, they ended up changing it so that you would win your buy-in back by making it to the top 5. And then the other half of your winnings would be distributed amongst players according to their chip counts. So the players that had more chips would actually make more than double their money. And the players that had fewer chips might make a little less than double their money, which was a way that they just incentivized players to kind of continue to play hands and to not just sit out to make the money like you would in a satellite. So sort of like turning it into some of these landmark or milestone satellite formats that you see today. In that time, now you can play triple or nothing tournaments. You can play, like you say, multi-table sit and goes. You can play a spin and goes, which are very popular over the last few years, where it's basically just 3 players, a hyper turbo format, and the prize pool is unknown until the game starts. And then it has a variable. It's a randomizer to see if your prize is going to be twice your buy-in or up to 100 times your buy-in. And those are very rare, but it's like a little gambly lottery element to these spin and go tournaments. And they have a whole other strategic adjustment to make towards those. So I guess one thing I'm getting at, Joe, is that a lot of these specific variants, there are ways to adjust your play to their structure. And the players that are most experienced in those variants are going to have like an experience edge, a structure edge, that newer players aren't going to have. So I don't know, what other kind of sit and go stuff, Rob, Kim, Mark, are there other kind of varieties of these? And then we'll talk a little bit about turbo tournaments and how we might adjust our play when the clock's ticking and we can't just sit around and wait to make hands. I guess I'll ask this, Mark, is there much of a difference in how you approach a 6 max tournament versus like a 9-handed tournament, as an example?
Well, not really, because you just play your position. Like when you're 6-handed, you're button cut off hijack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you just play hijack range instead of under the gun range. Yeah, I don't think there's much difference. It's just like getting used to like playing lots of hands, lots of 3-bet pots, like well, because when I was at the World Series, I just see people, they just play hijack range from every position or cutoff range from every position, and then you have some people, they just play as if they are under the gun 10-handed from every position. Like, yeah, people just
Yeah.
do people just do like play all sorts of ranges from all different positions, and it's fun to watch.
It's fun to
Sounds like
watch. Yeah.
Sounds like Jim at the cash table.
Maybe. I do like to splash around a bit at the cash tables. It's true.
I do have a really funny like observation like in cash game, because I've been raising a lot or three betting a lot. I see a lot of recreational players, they are limping. To trap me. They are not concerned about like making more money. They just want to trap. So what happens is one guy traps, the other guy traps, because they know that I'm gonna raise at some point, but I'm gonna need blockers to raise at some point, like a king 10 or something. And then like I ended up folding 7 deuce or 7-3 or 9-4, whatever. And then it comes ace, king, queen, and they're like, nobody knows where they're at. Like the guy has top set, the other guy has a straight. It's just complete chaos. I'm just watching it. That's really funny.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Like, knowing your positional ranges is such a valuable tool, in your arsenal, because it has a knock-on effect throughout the entire hand. So, knowing what hands to open from each position, and like knowing when to deviate from that according to the use of your table and that kind of thing, is one of the most important skills. Kim, you unmuted earlier.
Yeah, I did. I just gonna say I'm not sure if it's the same today in sit and goes, but when I used to play them a lot, and you were saying you often get short in sit and goes, and you're not necessarily on the bubble or anything yet. And I think it's important to, and then those days, just know your push fold range from every position at the table, because really when you're short, that's what's going to get you further by stealing the blinds and antes. And I know in tournaments now people are raising off 8 big blinds and raising off 10 big blinds, but I think that in the sit and goes, I think it's probably still beneficial to have a push fold strategy when you're getting short. And then I guess when you're on the bubble, you play it like any bubble where you're just trying to get through and then go for it. That's the way I used to play them anyway.
Yeah, and I do feel there is this more sort of, I don't know, I'm going to call it boring, but like mechanical approach to these tournaments, because like you say, stacks are getting short. We all kind of know where the payouts are going to be. And you don't have the depth to sort of, like Mark was saying, now you're playing in these spots where you're not playing deep enough to set mine, you're not in situations where you can play a lot of speculative hands. And so the like card distribution matters a lot. Like making hands, like just getting dealt big hands more often than the other players at the table actually matters a lot. So you're also kind of, as much as you're lowering variance by playing in smaller fields, when you're playing in like faster structures or things like that, you're also, you do kind of have to take more chances and flip more often. So let's talk about that adjustment to like turbo tournaments and or hyper turbos, or the pros and cons to taking these on as recreational players. So like I had a coaching client in the springtime who said, much like you, Joe, I have limited time, so I'm just playing these like hyper turbo sit and goes, and I feel like I'm making good poker decisions, but I'm just getting shellacked results wise. And I took a look at their Poker Tracker forward database, and we went through a bunch of hands, and I was like, like you're making good decisions here. Like you're just getting unlucky, or in these spots you're not understanding the ICM factors as well as the other players at the table. So you're giving up a bit of a skill edge there. And I said to them the same thing that I'm kind of saying to you and to our listeners, which is try some cash. Try just dipping into the cash game streak, because one of the things you want to be doing is you want to be practicing the right skills. You want to be practicing the same skills and decision-making process that you're going to be using when you really play, whatever that means to you, live events or like, larger MTTs, or when you take that Sunday off and you're firing a schedule. You want to be learning the right lessons. You want to be positively reinforcing the right lessons. You want to be making the same kinds of decisions. And when we get into some of these different variants, their incentives are not the same. The factors are not always going to be weighted the same as they would be in a typical structure. So I'm personally not a big fan of players just like dipping a toe into hyper turbos just to see if they can like spin it up. But that feels more like gambling to me than just playing poker. And then nothing wrong with that if that's your thing. But I don't think it like makes you a better poker player the same way playing like you're describing, like a 27 player tournament. That's more like an MTT, you get to practice that breaking down of the tables and getting to the final table. Cash games, you get to practice deeper stack play. So there's a trade-off, I think, between sort of maintaining the same incentives and lessons, but also being able to kind of dip in and out of it. Rob, Washington, what's on your mind?
Well, I was just going to say, cash is like totally different than tournaments. Totally different. I mean, the incentives that you have in a cash game, because of the deep stacks, you're going in with normally with 100 big blinds every single hand. The nuances of your shrinking stack size and the increasing blinds don't exist in a cash game. So I noticed when I play cash, and I play cash quite a bit, that a lot of the things that I have learned throughout my life when it comes to tournament poker is no longer applicable. So you have to be careful there. If you want to concentrate on being a tournament person, I mean, that is where you're going to make your bread and butter, then playing cash and getting really good at playing cash is not necessarily going to help your tournament game, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So be careful there. I mean, if you want to go there, that's great. I do that, and I still play tournaments. I still play multi-table tournaments, but there is a strategic difference. I have to switch my brain from one to the other because they do play so much differently.
And even to the point of opening ranges being different because there's no ante in the middle in a lot of cash games. So the pot's less valuable, it's less worth stealing. So you actually should open a tighter range. And also like are you in a raked game or are you in a time dropped game? Like that also, if you're in a raked game, you should be turning down some of those break even hands or those just slightly plus EV opens and just turn them into folds instead, because you're not going to be able to make that back. So yeah, no matter what you're doing, like there's all these different ways to play poker, and they all have their own kind of nuanced advantages and different incentives. So, the best thing you can do will be to just play the game that you want to play the most, play the game style that you're going to be playing most often, most frequently, and try and maintain that immersion. Maybe, you just don't get to have as many chances to play short instances of poker. Maybe that time should be better spent meticulously watching a training video and taking notes. If you've only got an hour or you've only got 2 hours, maybe that's study time twice a week when you'd prefer to be playing, but you can't put in the time to a big MTT, and we don't want you like learning the wrong lessons in these other situations. So that would be one thing, but I think you're approaching it right by having this sort of what's the closest thing to it, and it sounds like that 18-person tournament, that 9-person tournament, that 27-person tournament, you're still playing tournament poker, blinds are going up, ICM is a factor, but then again, like those are the games that are more solved. Those smaller field sit and goes are the games that are more professionals can kind of like put up 16 tables and play them automatically in their sleep. The bots are easier, with fewer variables, it's going to be easier to have a bot perform well in those games, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of trade-offs. Let's wrap this up by talking a bit about how we might adjust to turbos or hyper turbos specifically. So like one of the nice things about full ring tables with generous structures is that you get to kind of wait for hands more than playing shorthanded or faster structures. You're just not going to see as many hands in a turbo as you are in other longer levels before you get short stacked and have to shove. So I'll open this up. Mark, Kim, Rob, do you find that if you're playing faster structures, does that mean that you have to play more hands from a value point of view, like worse hands than you would normally play? Or do you just have to take more flips and like play them faster? Or is it neither of those things and something else completely? What are some of the ways we might adjust our typical play to playing in a faster structure? Kim, you unmuted there. What's on your mind?
I just think that you need to take more marginal spots.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you have lots of time in a tournament, you can, and it's for a big amount of your chip stack or all of your chip stack, you can just say, well, maybe I'm going to pass here and I'll take a better spot down the road. But I think you have to take these marginal spots like flips and whatever, and push with when you have draws and things that you might not, that deeper stacks or longer levels or whatever. So
yeah, that makes sense. Like playing in the WSOP main event with 2-hour levels and a deep starting stack, you can just pass on some like 55-45 flips where even though you're ahead, you can find a better spot to get your money in. But in a turbo tournament, you're not going to have enough time to find those spots. So like Kim's saying, you kind of have to take these flips. And what that means is that you're kind of introducing more variance into your game. That's not really true, but that's how it's going to feel to you because, a little more than half the time you're going to double up and a little less than half the time you're going to go home with nothing. So I guess another question would be like, do you have a skill edge in this field or not? That's another thing that we talk about a lot. Like if you have a skill edge against the field, maybe you do pass on some of these 55-45 spots because you'll be able to invest in better spots later post flop. If you're giving up a skill edge to the field, you should be embracing some of that variance and taking these flips and removing that advantage from the better, more experienced players who are going to be able to outplay you post flop. You're going to make bigger mistakes than they are post flop. And if they want to play with you, you're going to say, okay, well, you're going to have to do it by putting your chips in the middle and, we'll let God sort it out as opposed to letting, the skill make that little difference over all these hands. Mark, what about you? Do you approach like faster structures differently than you do slower structures?
I agree with what Kim said. You have to take thinner edges. And if you don't know proper push and call of charts in those turbo tournaments, you might as well throw money out of the window. Like you have no chance of winning. And to what you said about like the difference between like better structured tournaments and if you are the better player, you should pass up on some spots. That's all I try to avoid. Like I'm really just trying to avoid, like when I play like WSOP tournaments, like 1-hour levels, I'm not gonna flip with you. Like I'm just trying to play as many streets with recreationals as often as possible. Like I'm not gonna call light you're all in because like why should I? Like you're making so many mistakes on turn and rivers, right?
Yes.
Where like if you would know that that's my strategy, you would just ship it on me every time, right? Yeah,
I think that's right for sure. So Joe, I don't know if this has really answered the question that you brought to the table. I think we answered some other questions that you didn't ask, but
yeah, I mean it did that and more. This was fantastic, really.
Do you have any follow-up questions, or is there any nuance that you want to tease out of the group here before we wrap? I mean, we're here for you, man. This is why we do it.
Your recommendation on the cash and I think is a good thing. And then those 18 or 27 person tournaments, they're a little more like the multi-table tournaments. These
Yes.
6-handed sit and goes, they're probably not ideal on learning the strategy around multi-table tournaments.
I think that's right. And so I would encourage you, if you take one thing out of this conversation, would be to find the tournament variant that most closely maps on to what you want to be playing, and try and do as much of that as possible, and try and just stay as close to that as possible. And I think you're right. Like the Turbo 6 Max is going to be a different experience than these other sit and goes, which are more in line with what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Alexis. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks for your support as a premium member here at RecPoker, and thanks for coming on the forums edition and sharing your questions with the group. I mean, this is what makes it great. I wish more premium members came on the show. Maybe they'll get inspired from your appearance here, and we'll get more premium members on the show later. All right. Well, does anyone else have anything else to add before we roll on out of here? Doesn't look like it. Well, then I want to thank Joe Millay for his excellent question, Mark Zhang, Kim Kilroy, and Rob Washam for their contributions and their support by being RECing Crew members over the years. And I want to say to everyone else, if you enjoyed this sort of strategic conversation, a lot of our RECing Crew members offer coaching to our community. And so if you go to rec.poker/coaching, you can find all sorts of friendly faces of folks like Mark and Kim, Rob, and myself, who, for very reasonable prices, are interested in doing group coaching or one-on-one coaching. And I'll just tell you, if you think that your game isn't at the level where coaching would pay off yet, you've got it all wrong. I grew up in the game of poker as a lurker, watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading books on my own. I wish I had gotten help earlier in my poker career. For me, it was joining RecPoker in 2019 that got me to kind of open my eyes and start accepting help from other people. And God, I played poker for so long before that. I could have gotten so much better, so much faster if I had just gotten some advice from other knowledgeable peers and mentors that are available in the poker world. So come join our community for free. Please give our premium membership a try. Get your first month for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. And seriously, consider finding some coaching or mentorship programs that can help you really develop like a customized, personalized approach to how you can solve your own leaks as quickly as possible. You can learn from other people's mistakes, folks, is what I'm saying. You don't have to just learn from your own mistakes. So find some other people like us that have made a lot of mistakes and see if you can learn from our mistakes instead. So on that happy note, thanks to Running Aces, Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their continued support. Everyone here on the RECing Crew, of course, you, the listeners at home, we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next week on the RecPoker Podcast. Good night, everybody.